If your Monstera is overcrowded or struggling to grow, battling pests and diseases, or facing wilting and yellowing leaves, pruning is often your first line of defense. Hello gardening friends and welcome to All About Gardening. My name is Madison and today I'm going to show you how you can prune your Monstera in 6 easy steps. Before we get started with the process itself, the first question is usually, do I actually need to prune my Monstera at all? And the answer is yes and no, depending on what your plant looks like at the time. Pruning your Monstera could mean cutting off 1 or 2 leaves throughout its entire lifetime, or it could mean cutting your plant back once a year, depending on how it's growing and what you want to get out of your plant. So in these 6 steps I'm going to show you, not all of them apply every time. What you're going to do is go through the list and decide what you need based on the performance of your plant and what the purpose of the prune is to decide whether that step is needed or whether your Monstera can be left alone. The best time to trim your Monstera is in late winter or early spring, just before growth really kicks off. This will make sure that the plant recovers quickly and can push out new growth, rather than pruning during the colder months where growth is slowed. This depends on the reason you're pruning. For example, if you have an issue with pests and diseases, or if there's some leaves that are really struggling, it's better to trim them off as soon as you can rather than waiting for early spring in order to save the plant's energy. Before you get started, you'll need to grab your trusty pruning shears, and at the risk of repeating myself in every single video, make sure your shears are clean and disinfected. They can transfer diseases to your plants, even if you don't know it, if you haven't spotted it yet. So make sure you keep them clean and well oiled so that they last a long time. Step 1 in pruning your Monstera is to trim off any damaged or old leaves. These draw energy away from the plant that could be spent on putting out new leaves, so it's best to remove them before they yellow and die off naturally. Now in this plant, I luckily can't spot any major damage. There's a few tears on some of the leaves, but not enough that it would make me want to cut off the whole leaf, rather keep them on there for as much photosynthesis as possible. So this is a step I'm going to skip. Step 2 in the pruning process is quite similar, and that involves trimming off any leaves that show signs of pest and disease damage. Pests and diseases are something we don't want to deal with indoors, especially with the potential to spread to the rest of our houseplants. So the sooner you tackle this problem, the better. Pruning in the early stages is the best way to get rid of these pests, as it cuts them off the plant completely, rather than trying treatments that may not work or require several follow-ups before they get rid of the problem. In this case, I also have no pests and diseases on this plant. I did spot a couple of small bugs on this leaf over here, but those can simply be removed by hand. They haven't done any real damage yet, and I don't want to cut off this whole leaf for just a few bugs. If you see any signs of disease, especially underneath the leaves and where pests like to hide out, make sure you trim those off at the base so that you remove them from the plant completely. Once you've trimmed off any problematic areas, you can move on to step 3, which is trimming overcrowded spots in the plant. Now, a lush Monstera is definitely not a bad thing, but additional airflow can reduce the risk of pests and diseases, and it can stop the plant from becoming too top heavy. This one, if I tip it a little bit, it does tend to fall over. So this one definitely needs to be trimmed back. I'm going to start by taking a look at the base and just removing any of these lower leaves that aren't growing very well, because these are just taking up space and don't really help the Monstera grow at the end of the day. Look for areas where the stems are quite densely packed to promote as much airflow around the base as possible. Depending on the cutting, you can also use these to propagate new plants as long as there is a node at the base. So when you're trimming, aim for spots where you can include a little node to propagate the plant in water. And if you want instructions on how to do that, you can follow the other tutorials on our channel. With these removed, let me get rid of this small one over here. It looks like there's a lot more space so that the roots at the bottom can breathe and new healthy leaf growth can appear further up the plant. After that light trim, we can move on to step 4, which is cutting off any stretching leaves. These will appear when your Monstera is placed in a low light area, as the leaves will start stretching towards the nearest light source. The stems will become thin and the leaf will look diminished. It won't grow very well. So it's best to trim these off, move the pot to a better spot, and encourage new growth. Because this plant is so overcrowded and lives in a very bright spot, there aren't many stretching leaves. It looks healthy, but if there were, I would need to cut it off at the right spot, just above a node, to encourage new growth to appear when it's moved to its brighter area. Step 5 is more about aesthetics than anything else, and that is trimming off any long aerial roots. Monsteras use their aerial roots to climb, and they can also absorb moisture from the air. But if your plant is large and overgrown like this one is, you may see some of these aerial roots growing very long, searching out places to attach to. While they don't do any harm to the plant and it's a sign of good, healthy growth, they also don't look great either. So if you want to, you can trim off these long aerial roots just to keep your plant a bit tidier. So you're going to trim it off close to the plant without damaging the actual stem to avoid any risk of pests and diseases settling in. And there the base of the plant looks much cleaner and tidier. The final step in the pruning process is quite drastic and only really necessary if you want to restrict the growth of your Monstera, and that involves trimming back the roots. So for example, if I wanted this Monstera to stay in the same container and remain this manageable size for whatever reason, I would take it out of its pot and cut back the roots by about 1/3. Any more than that can shock the plant, but they can definitely handle some trimming without any adverse effects. Now, if you pull this plant out of its container, you'll see how overgrown the roots actually are. So what I would do is pull these apart and just cut them off with my shears, get rid of some of the old soil, and then replant it. I'm not going to demonstrate that because I would rather keep this plant large and repot it into a bigger container. But if you do want to keep your plant small and manageable, that is the way to do it. Once you've gone through all 6 steps on the list, you can move your Monstera back to its previous spot to continue growing healthily and happily. Make sure you continue to trim throughout the year whenever needed based on these different steps and their goals. If you want specific details on the pruning process, you can head to allaboutgardening.com, or you can take a look at the other videos on our channel for more houseplant tips and tricks.